Today is training number 4, and we're going to learn about how to interpret your audience. Training content, 2 things. Who is your audience? Do you really know your congregation? It is very important to know what kind of needs they have and who they are so that you can deliver the message more effectively. The second thing, how to make good illustration in your sermon. And a lot of people say the congregation, when they leave the pew and then when they go back home, most of the times they will forget about your sermon. Maybe 80% or 90%, even 100%. Now that's definitely wasting time. However, here's the thing. In most cases, at least there is something they remember, something that sticks to their mind. Do you know what that is? It is illustration that you use. It is the story that you used. So it is very, very important to make a really good illustration in your sermon so that people can remember your preaching. So how we can make that good illustration. So that's the 2 things we're going to look at today. Who is your audience and how to make the good illustrations. Now, Matt Chandler, he is the lead pastor of a village church. To get to know his church congregation, now, by the way, he is leading a huge mega church, so it will be very difficult to get to know each one of them. But anyway, he did the survey, and he surveyed all congregation of his church to put their confusing questions to the offering box. Now, guess what? They got the biggest offerings ever. By the way, he was asking questions. What kind of message is the most confusing to you? What kind of question do you have the most? And then he gathered all the answers, and then he came up to the most pressing question. It was this: I'm a Christian, but why I am not changing? Most people asked this question. Now, you can do the survey in your church, and maybe you can do the same thing, asking what kind of questions your congregation have. And then at the end of the day, you may have different questions, or you may have the same questions, like, I've been Christian for 30 years and 40 years, but why I'm not changing? Now, you know their question. Now, you can prepare a message, you can prepare your preaching to answer those questions. And then, wow, that will be very powerful because your congregation want to know how their questions can be answered. Okay, so that can relate to your preaching even more. So getting to knowing their questions or needs are the most effective way to know your audience. And when you know your audience, then you know what kind of message that you need to prepare for, preach to. Okay, so this is one of the ways to get to know your congregation. Now, let's see. There are very general ideas how you can identify your congregation. There are 2 points to identify your audience. First one is the level of spiritual maturity, and the second is the level of understanding. What kind of spiritual maturity your congregations are, and how much they understand your sermon, your language. Those are the categories that you can figure out what kind of audiences you have. Let's go further. Well, level of spiritual maturity. Well, there are so many different kinds of people in your pew, in your church. First, there may be some people who are totally against the Christianity, but for some reason they are in your church right now. And the next level is, well, they're in your church, they're not necessarily against Christianity or against you, but they're not interested. They're just here, but they're not really interested in the Bible. The next level, now they acknowledge that Bible is really good. So they are growing in their faith. Okay. Now the next level is a Sunday Christian. They know coming to church on Sunday is what they have to do or they need to do. So they come all the time and they go to Bible study and they go to Sunday school and they may be very committed, but they just come on Sunday. Now, the next level there'll be a new believer who just accepted Jesus. Well, not every Sunday Christian is a believer, right? Some of them are just coming to church, but some of them really became a Christian. They are saved, they're converted, and their hearts are filled with love for the glory of God, and they began to love Jesus Christ. They began to love your preaching, maybe, hopefully. So they're a new believer. The next level is a growing believer. They're not enough just coming to church on Sunday, but they want to do something for the glory of God. They're growing like crazy. So they're the last level is the leaders. They already have an experience of ministry, and they're ready to go and serve anywhere, whatever God is leading them to be. So you see that all these 7 kinds of people are sitting in your pew, okay? So where you need to speak into? That will be a very important question for you need to ask. Now, level of understanding. Not everyone has education, same education level. Some of them, number one, some of them don't really understand your language. Now, when you say the word like salvation, conversion, baptism, sanctification, some people have no clue what you're saying. So they have no understanding of language. Or some people may speak the different language. For example, in my church, we have 15 different people groups speaking 15 different languages. They're coming to my church, and some of them don't understand English, okay? So, yeah, maybe in your church, some of them don't understand your national or ethnic language. That can be a very interesting situation. Now, the next one is the less educated. Maybe some of your church people didn't go to college or high school, middle school, even elementary school, right? So you need to figure out what kind of education level they have. The last one is a well-educated. Maybe some people in your church are PhD or master level people, and they're very well-versed with a difficult language or terminologies. So you may want to use their level language in your preaching. So it is very important to know this different language, education level as well when you preach, when you prepare for your preaching. Now, there's an audience quadrant to figure out what kind of message you want to preach according to their level. If you see this quadrant, the maturity and understanding, based on the maturity and understanding, you see the 4 style of preaching. Now, if you're more maturity, if you have more mature Christians, you want to go to more of edifying, right? But if you have less mature people, then you want to be more evangelistic. Now, if you have a more understanding people, then you are okay with just verbal preaching. But if you have a less understanding people, your preaching needs to be more visual, right? So the people can see what you are preaching, so they can understanding by looking, right? So based on this parameter or categories, there are 4 styles of preaching that you may consider to use for your congregation. The first one is this, apologetic style of preaching. Apologetic, this is for the high understanding. They have maybe really well-educated people, but low maturity. They're not believers or just a new believer. Okay, so they need more of a verbal communication, but evangelistic message. They can be, your congregation can be non-believing international students, non-believing dental clinic lawyers, young professionals, new converts. But your sermon needs to be more logical because that's how they think, process their mind. Your sermon titles can be like, Why We Believe, or Why is the Bible True? That type of message can be very relevant to this type of group. So apologetic preaching style. The next preaching style is expository preaching. This is for the high understanding people and high maturity. Like they've been already Christians for many years. So they can understand your verbal communication, and this is more for the edifying. Now they can be the established readers of the Bible, and they desire to grow deep in Scripture. They want to know systematic Bible study. So your message can be very intellectual, verse by verse, very logical process of exposition of Scripture. Your sermon title can be the Book of John series, like John, you're just going through from John chapter 1 until 21. So it can be very systematic preaching. The next style is a storytelling style, storytelling. This is for low understanding, low maturity, but it can be visual, it should be visual and evangelistic at the same time. Your group can be non-believers among foreigners or younger age groups. Like if your church congregations are mostly undereducated or very young people, this may be a great tool, great way of preaching. It can be a very cross-cultural. For example, in my church, we have many refugees. Many of them didn't go to college and they don't understand English. And some of them are non-believers. They're from Muslim background or Hindu background. So they don't understand the words like sanctification or salvation. So I use a lot of visual image. And rather than going through verse by verse, I use a lot of stories because anybody can understand the story. Even the babies can understand the story. So we need to identify what kind of people group we are preaching to so that they can understand. That's the whole point, right? We want them to understand. You want your congregation to understand your preaching, right? So storytelling can be good to this type of group. Sermon titles can be like the story of Joseph or David or Goliath. And that's very exciting, right? Anybody can listen to this type of stories. The last type is topical preaching. Now, this is for low understanding but high maturity group. It can be visual or very edifying sermon. Now, this group they desire to know practical ways of Christian growth. So the message style is very practical rather than intellectual or theoretical argument. Okay, sermon titles can be like how to live Christian life and how to share the gospel. So there's a lot of questions like how. So the topical preaching can work for this type of group who really want to know more of a practical things as Christians. So let's put them all together. Apologetic preaching, expository preaching, storytelling preaching, and topical preaching. Now, I'm not saying that you have to stick into only one style. For me, even though my congregation are more prone to storytelling, but mostly I use all four of them. Now, here is the thing. It depends on the contents. It depends on the audience. But as long as you are Christ-centered, as long as you are preaching Jesus Christ, whatever style you do, it doesn't really matter. So the contents, the message, the purpose is to exalt and lift up Jesus Christ in your preaching. But be sensitive to the needs of your church congregation and know your church congregation so you can speak more effectively. But always preach Jesus Christ. Now, the next part is how to make good illustrations. Now you know your congregation, your audience. Now, the second thing you need to do, very, very important, you need to make a very good story, illustrations, so the people, your audience, can remember what you said. Now, there are 5 things you need to do. First, describe. Second, God's heart. Third, keyword. Fourth, ministry application. And 5th, commitment. Now, if you do this every week, if you practice this every week, I can tell you will be a great sermon illustrator. And your preaching will not be the same. Will be very different. And it will make a huge impact for your congregation. Let's go one by one very quickly. The first, describe. Let me give you an example. Let's say you are illustrating about light. Okay? Now, light is white. It's a bright. Whenever there is light, there is no darkness. But wherever there is darkness only, there is no light. But now here's the thing that you need to try. Whenever you describe something, you want to put negative and positive at the same time. Negative, positive. For example, for the light, negative is darkness, right? And the positive is the good things about the light. Now, the positive thing about light is this. Whenever there is light, it's hot, it's warm, it's very bright. But the negative part is wherever there is no light, there's a darkness, it's cold, and there's miserable, dark, black kind of things full and filled in the darkness. Okay, so describe what is the light and what is the negative or positive about the light is. That's the starting point. The second part is God's heart. Now, what is God here in the light? Now, positive thing is this. Jesus is the light, right? Light of the world, according to John chapter 1. And Jesus shines in the darkness. And that's the positive thing. However, the darkness does not like the light. And the darkness does not know the light. That's the negative part. And there's death in darkness. That is the negative part, right? Now, what is the point word here in this illustration? Of course, it's a light, right? Now, the negative part is we are in the darkness, but sin is darkness, and we are in sin. That's definitely negative. Eternal death, there is a punishment for our sin. It's the eternal death. That's the negative part. But Jesus is the light. That's a positive. And Jesus came to us. That's a positive. Now, why am I saying positive, negative, minus, plus? Because if your illustration has no minus, if it's all positive only, then there's no impact. But when you put the minus part, people will feel so desperate. Yes, we're in the darkness. We're in sin. We need hope. Where is the hope? Then you bring the plus, positive part. Jesus is the light, and Jesus is the hope. So the people can feel, wow, we are in miserable state. We are in miserable sin, but Jesus is the answer. He is the light. We need Jesus, right? So presenting minus and plus in your illustration, you can maximize the impact of your story to tell that you need Jesus. And Jesus came to you. Receive Jesus, right? You can lead your congregation to Jesus by saying that. But when you just say, oh yeah, Jesus is the light and Jesus came to you, without telling that your people are in darkness, your people may say, oh, okay, that sounds good, but I'm okay. My job is okay. My family is okay. I'm in the light already. Why should I come to Jesus? You see what I mean? So always expose minus and plus together in your illustrations. Now, ministry application. So we need to stop being in the darkness because we're in the minus, but we don't want to be in the minus always. We want to come to the plus, right? So we need to stop being in the darkness and we need to come to Jesus, who is the light, and we need to share Jesus, who is the light. Because he is the plus, he is the positive, but the people around us, our families, our relatives, our classmates, they're still in the darkness. We need to share Jesus, who is the light. Lastly, commitment. Stop spending too much time on internet, but read the Bible every day more and more and share Jesus at least 2 times a week. Now, this is a very practical part. Right? Now you are asking, you are commanding people to do something, but based on the minus, plus, and illustrations. Now, people understand the story, right? Your story, and they want to do something. Now, to that, you are telling them what to do, right? So they understand, they're ready to act, and they go out and act. They experience God. I mean, that's the whole point of sermon, right? So you definitely need to have this very clear, practical commitment part. So, putting it all together, describe minus plus, God's heart, and keyword, ministry application, and commitment. Now, this is how you build your application. illustrations. Now, if you practice this every week, you will see the difference in your sermon. Now, personally, I practice this making illustrations at least one time every week with other pastors. And it really, really helped my preaching ministry. Okay? So I really want to encourage you to practice this, discipline yourself to go through these 5 steps to build your illustrations. Now, the question is, how can you find that illustrations? How do you find it? I mean, people search up the internet. People sometimes don't do this, but sometimes they steal somebody else's story or illustrations and tell to the audience as if they made that illustrations. No, that's not right, right? You must have your own illustrations. Now, how can you find illustrations? Here's the thing. Now, in the previous training, we learned about how to interpret the text. And we came up with the keyword. Do you remember that? Mark chapter 5, from verse 1 through 20. And we also studied about how to make outline. Now, that's your preaching content. Now, look at that preaching content again. Let's look at it in the screen here. Nature of evil, nature of God, and nature of change. And you have the sub-ideas, and that was your outline. Now, that is your main thing to preach about. So, it is very logical to get some illustrations related to your topic, your outline. So, let's see. It talks about nature. So, your illustration must be something related to nature, right? So let's just let's start from there. Let's find story about nature. Okay, now the next job is to choose related or relevant words to that keyword, which is nature. Okay, but that word or that idea must be catchy, something attractive so that people can understand, but also common, that everyone understands, right? Catchy and common concept or words to that keyword. So this is what I came up with. Okay, nature. There can be many nature, like a nature of human, and nature of animal, nature of music, nature of culture. But I personally came up with this, nature of robot. Nature of robot. Okay? Now, I got it, the robot. Now, the first thing, do you remember that? Describe it, right? Let's describe robot. Minus, plus. What is the negative about the robot? It's artificial. It doesn't have any life. There is no life. But the plus, positive is, robots are smart and they take no vacation. They work all the time. But the minus is, they can take over human jobs in 10 years. Well, that's not good. And there's a confusion between human and robot. Those are very serious problems. That's the minus part. So what is the difference between human nature and robot nature? It is love. Human has love, but the robot doesn't have love, right? So that's the described part. Now, the next one is the God's heart, ministry application, and the commitment. I put them all together here. It goes like this. Now, God created human differently from robot. God is love, and human can love, but robot cannot love. Human and robot are different in nature. Likewise, God and evil are different in nature. And people who met God and who didn't are different in nature as well. So we need to know the nature of God, evil, and change in human heart. So using robot as an illustration, my point was getting into the nature of God and nature of evil and nature of a change. I mean, that was the outline, the major content of my preaching. So I used the robot as the illustration and introduction to get to the outline. So the last question is, where should we put this illustration? For me, I put this robot illustration in the introduction so that it can lead to the body and conclusion of the remaining part of the sermon. So it goes like this. This is my paragraph. Actually, I used this in my own sermon. This is the introduction, illustration. These days, we hear a lot about artificial intelligent robot. Study shows that in 10 years, lots of jobs will disappear because of these robots. They can read and think like human and work more than human. Jobs like cashier, editor, construction work, and even high-level work like lawyer and doctor will disappear because the robots can do all of them. Is it exciting? No, it's scary because a lot of people will lose their job. Bigger problem is that a lot of people will be confused of difference between human and the robot. Just like the bumper sticker saying, "My dog is better than your kid," there will be bumper stickers saying, "My robot is better than your wife, your husband, or you." Is it coming? It is coming pretty soon. Now, by this time, people can be, "Oh yeah, that is really a problem. We need to face this." Where is the hope? Where is the really answer to this problem, right? Now, I continue. But don't be confused. There's a clear difference between human and robot. What difference is human from robot? It is human nature. One of the human nature is this. Human can love. Robot cannot love. Only human can love. Robot can take over your job, but it cannot take over your nature, your love. That nature distinguishes us from robot. Today, I want to share with you about the nature. 3 big distinguishing natures. Nature of evil, nature of God, and nature of change. You see, I made a transition from robot to today's content. So, I hope you can discipline yourself with the 5 steps to make a good illustrations. And when you have a good illustrations, you can gather people's heart in one place and lead them to the major topic, major content of your sermon. So that will be a huge win to attract them to the message. In the next training, we're going to learn about how we can craft sentences. When you write script, it is also important to make the sentences very appealing, right? And also how to organize thought, repetition of main words and big ideas, how we can put all of them together, more effective procedure in your sermon. And how to make a good application. Today we learned about how to make a good illustrations for people to relate and remember the message. Application is the part that you actually help them to do something. If they do nothing after your sermon, there's no change, there's no transformation, nothing. But they need to do something based on your message. Application helps them to do it. So this is a very, very important. How we can make the good application. And then ultimately how to write a draft or script your sermon. Okay, that will be the next training part. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next training.